I call this meeting to order. Um, I would like to inform the board that Mr. C has relocated out of the area,
Oh,
and therefore is tendered his resignation for that reason. I do want to thank him for his service to the board during his time here. And I do want to also make note that in addition to our legal counsel being here tonight, we do have City Manager Chip Boyles and Deputy City Manager Ashley Marshall here with us tonight. So thank you both for attending. That being said, we would like to move forward with approval of the agenda. Is there any changes that any member of the board would like to propose?
Chairman Brown, if I could be recognized, I would like to make an addition, a brief maybe discussion, perhaps after the third public comment session or right before it, regarding a work session, either a public work session amongst ourselves, all of us, on Zoom, or I know that we had discussed a second all-day work session in conjunction with City Council. But I'd like for us, since we're, considering two very important ordinances, things that will determine how we go forward and what the executive director will have to work with, that maybe we should look at talking about that instead of, waiting on City Council, since I think we need to have more discussion amongst ourselves about our ordinances and our operating procedures. So I'd like to insert that in right after the third public comment, before upcoming training or updating training, if that's possible. I'd like to make a motion to add that.
Is there a second, or do we want to have discussion on that? I think I do know that Vice Chair Mendez is going to cover a lot of that in the number 9 discussion, and I think that could potentially be placed on that in there. But if there's a second,
is that all right with you, Nancy?
Well, I'll reserve that and maybe have a comment about that later on, because like the chairman said, we do have a packed agenda, and do want to hear from the public, and do want to really delve deeply into the hearing procedures, and definitely hopefully there's enough comment from the public going forward. So I'll remove my request and just park that to my left, your right probably, and visit it later.
Okay, very well. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Vice Chair.
I would just like to point out that we have guest presenters here, and I don't know what their schedule is, but if it might reduce the load on them to move the item 9 up in the agenda so they can take care of children and other personal needs and sooner, rather than have to sit through the preliminaries.
Okay, and my apologies for not acknowledging Miss Burke and Miss Hepler. Where do you propose that go?
Trying to get out of full screen here. I don't see any reason why we couldn't jump into it after the adoption of the minutes.
Well, I'd like to push back on that and put it after the first section of public comment, since we don't really have a separate public hearing comment time for the hearing of the ordinance. I think it would be nice to hear from those members of the public, because we certainly do have 2 letters that I'd like to read into the record regarding, our hearing procedures, and I would like to hear from people first. about it, and then we can jump into it. Unless you think the public comment should come after we have our discussion.
I think placement of the public comment after the discussion is fine. That initial public comment is there as standard, just in case any member of the public wanted to bring that up. I think that, what is that? Number 9 can be moved to after adoption of the minutes. Does that suffice?
Okay, as long as we don't take any, action on the ordinance until after we hear from the public comment.
Well, this is a
Oh,
discussion.
Discussion, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
go ahead, Mr. Mendez.
yeah, that's my motion. I
Move to have
Second.
okay, very well. And who is Ms. Parks? I do see that Ms. Gilmore is in the attendees section, the 434 number. Could she be moved to the panelists? Thank you. Okay, we do have a second for the motion of moving the discussion of the bylaws to after adoption of the minutes. Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board, please?
Yes. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore,
yes,
Mr. Mendez,
yes,
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
So that motion passes and that discussion item will be changed. All right, so next on the agenda would be the adoption of the minutes. Does anyone have any objections to adopting last meeting minutes that went out?
I move we accept them as written.
Is there a second?
second,
Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
Yes. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore,
yes,
Mr. Mendez,
yes,
Mr. Watson.
Yes.
Okay, that passes. So now we are at the discussion of the bylaws and the ordinance issues. And for that, I will turn it over to Vice Chair Mendez.
thanks, Bellamy. I'm just going to take a few minutes here and then let Sarah and Teresa give us their insights on investigations and possibly even on disciplinary action as well. And we just want to tell you where we are. As you know, at our work session, we presented the City Council with a preliminary discussion draft ordinance. We've received some comments back from them and from others. And in the time since then, we've been working on building some procedures to go with the ordinance as it is written. And one of the documents that was circulated with our packet was a proposed sort of new organization for our operating procedures. We don't need to go over it right now. The gist of it is that I thought that most of it is kind of routine housekeeping, organizational, uncontroversial, with the three major exceptions being the board's power to do investigations, how the board's disciplinary action and hearing procedures. And I developed a very crude layman's draft of the disciplinary procedures section. And we heard from Bellamy and I had a conference call with our independent counsel and the city attorney just prior to this meeting, at which we were told, the kind of, whoa, this is really complicated. And we need to think about this and talk about it quite a bit more. And so, that's basically where we are. Anyone who attended that meeting and wants to modify my interpretation, that's fine. And I'm sure we'll talk more about implementation and priorities as we go forward. Now, you saw, I guess, that Sarah and Teresa sent around some very interesting flowcharts concerned with options for investigatory powers. And I'd like very much to hear what they had to say.
Hey everyone. I think I know most everybody, although I don't think I know Ms. Marshall. So nice to meet you virtually. And yeah, I'm a former CRB member and have been involved with the task force that is the subcommittee that's been working on the ordinance crafting. And so I just wanted to sort of introduce the idea that Teresa and I have for tonight and turn it over to her. But one of the things that we heard in that joint session with City Council was that, they really want a better sense of what this looks like in practice. Like if a complaint comes in, what happens next? Where does it go? Who is charged with which sort of procedural roles? And we thought it might be helpful to try to sort of map some of that out and just figure out what some of these options look like. And so it may not be perfectly matched up with the ordinance that you all have written. Yeah, we thought, why don't we give a try looking at two different sort of investigative models and see what those would look like in practice. And then hopefully sort of open it up for questions, conversation, identifying next steps that need to happen in order to get us to the right place. So just personally, I am a licensed investigator. I have been doing investigative work for about 15 years. I range from mostly criminal defense investigations, and I have done, work for the Innocence Project. I've done work for folks on death row in Virginia. I mostly now work across the country on sort of complex criminal cases, but many of those involve investigations into police investigations, criminal investigations. But that was sort of how I got engaged in this a few years ago, for those who don't know that. So sort of thinking about how this would work investigatively felt like something I could contribute, and I'll pass it on to Teresa.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So I'm Teresa Hepler. I figured I would just introduce myself real quick because I don't know most of you. I'm an attorney at LAJC. I've been there actually for just about 5 weeks, but basically about 80% of my time has been spent looking into PCRB stuff and specifically how investigative models could look, as well as disciplinary as well. I came here from being a public defender, where I spent, as you can imagine, a majority of my time looking at police investigations, coming up with my own strategy for investigations, conducting investigations with our hired investigator, talking to witnesses. So that's the place I'm coming from in terms of tackling what an investigative procedure could look like. And then Mr. Parks, would you be able to put up the slideshow?
Yes, I will be able to.
Oh, I apologize, Ms. Parks.
It's okay. One second. I don't know why it's not working.
That's the last slide. So if you scooch all the way to the front. Yep, there you are.
I just want to make sure you pay attention. Okay.
So before we go into the flow charts, I just wanted to give context for what I figured their purpose was. So basically, Sarah and I looked into how just how the investigative model could look. So I just wanted to be clear that this isn't necessarily what Sarah and I are advocating for to be adopted, or even what various members of the community might think should be adopted. But this is just the result of listening to what City Council had to say, thinking about their questions, trying to come up with some possible answers, and also filling in the gaps and really mapping out just what the process would look like, because that seemed to be, like Sarah said, what they were interested in. So rather than go through each and every box, because that would be extraordinarily dry for everybody, I figured I would just summarize what each portion of this entails. So the blue section is, as it says, the intake and investigation. So the complaints in this model that we kind of foresaw, the complaints come to the executive director. The executive director hands them off to the investigator and also gets all of the important and relevant material from the police department. And that can include body camera footage, police reports, use of force reports, any witness statements, if there are any preliminary ones. And the investigator would then use those materials to conduct investigation by interviewing witnesses and tracking down any other evidence. Then at that point, the investigator would create a report, and an investigative subcommittee of the board would review the report, hold a hearing. The board would determine whether the complaint had enough evidence to be sustained, or didn't have enough evidence to be sustained, so that would be not sustained, or there was enough evidence, but the officer was excused or exonerated in his or her actions. There's an appeal to the full board included, and then after the full board makes that determination, the board and the executive director would determine whether it was a serious breach of policy or procedure as to trigger the disciplinary procedure. And Sarah, did you want to talk about the disciplinary procedure here?
Yeah, so we thought a lot about this and thought about, I'm not sure exactly what the conversation you all had with your counsel and Ms. Robertson was, but I think that the disciplinary procedure is tied to investigations in the way that the state statute is written. And I think it's important to develop a really strong investigative model to begin. And I'm generally not one who's interested in like saying, let's do something later. And then if it's like a lot of things in local government, it actually doesn't happen later. So I'm a little bit like hesitant to even say, let's not ask for all powers. And so that's sort of why I don't think this is something I necessarily advocate for strongly, except to say that discipline seems like a challenging topic for the city to contemplate at this time. And if you want to get something done quickly and get something functional in the books, one idea would be to create sort of the strongest level of disciplinary recommendations that you can, which I can talk about what we contemplated for that. And then to mandate within a year or 2 years a full review of whether the recommendations that you all make are followed through with, whether those are overturned in the grievance procedure, and whether there are what needs to change in order to further the disciplinary power of the CRB. So the way that we thought about it was in these serious cases, which is not going to be the majority of cases that come into to the board. Most of the time, like in this model, the board does all of the investigations of complaints and incidents. So that is not internal affairs job to investigate their fellow officers' conduct anymore in this model. So this is now done through an independent investigative body, which is staffed either through the executive director, an investigator, or hired investigator. And then that person collects all the evidence, provides findings, and the board is sort of like almost a jury in that setting, like decides what the evidence shows, what it proves, and makes a decision that way. And then when it gets to the issue of discipline, if it meets this very high bar for serious misconduct, then the way the state statute says it has to occur is that the board has to consult with the officer supervisor, which could be a superior officer, could be the chief of police, and discuss appropriate disciplinary action. So this is once the board has made its final decision, which is apart from anything the police would do. The board gets to make a decision on the findings, sort of findings of fact. And when it comes to determining what happens after that in these very serious cases, the small subset, they get to choose sort of what is appropriate disciplinary action. But instead of saying you must do this, and this is the final say, what this chart contemplates is to recommend discipline based on the disciplinary matrix. So right now, the police department has a disciplinary matrix, and certain conduct falls into certain categories. So the lowest level of misconduct falls in the lowest levels of discipline, and it increases up to the most severe conduct falls into the highest forms of discipline. So these serious conducts are likely going to be serious incidents that need severe discipline. And so the PCRB would then make a recommendation amongst this disciplinary matrix. And the way that it's actually already written in the CPD policy, which I think is nice because it gives you a great avenue into sort of adopting some of that language, is that then there can't be a departure more than one step above or one step below what your disciplinary recommendation is. So if you say this should be the highest level of severity, then the chief imposes discipline in that highest category, or could depart by one if, say, she has information that mitigates it from her perspective working with this particular officer, or her superior, or their superior officer says that. So then the officer is notified of the recommendation, given the opportunity to discuss with the supervisor, the chief, meets their due process rights. They have the notification, especially if there's termination, they have a pre-termination notification that they are owed, and they also have to have an opportunity to discuss with their supervisor, their chief, what happened. The chief will then choose that final discipline based on what your recommendations are, without navigating far from that. And then the officer moves on. If they choose to appeal that and wants to file a grievance, they go through the municipal grievance process. So I think, as you all know, there's currently this Law Enforcement Procedural Guarantees Act in Virginia. And that's how most law enforcement officers go through a grievance now, if they have one, because they can choose one or the other, either this Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which is what they call it, or the municipal grievance procedure. But they can't choose both procedures for the same conduct, same complaint. So now with this new law, they will no longer be able to use that Law Enforcement Procedural Guarantees Act, and they will just go through the city's municipal grievance, which goes through an appeals board at the end. And so that's sort of how we thought might be a good workaround to consider, like what might meet the needs of the community, to getting a significant amount of investigative power and getting to have a fairly significant say in discipline, but wouldn't terrify everybody to, by July, come up with sort of new HR procedures. So the other thing I want to add is that your hearings are in public, and the disciplinary grievance proceedings would be occurring most likely in private. And so I think it's very important to add into your ordinance the auditing function of determining, is your process working? So one of the auditing functions of the CRB could be to, and I think should be, to request all determinations on grievances through this auditing power that you have, to see if all of your decisions are privately being overridden. And then I think you can make strong public recommendations if that is the case, which I have no idea if it would be, But if it is the case, you make strong recommendations to change municipal grievance proceedings so that you have more power and more disciplinary authority under the city's model. So this is sort of the end of flowchart 1, which is when the PCRB is the sole investigative body. We're going to sort of talk about some pros and cons, but does anybody have like a question or a thought that we should get to now?
Sarah, Chef Frazier, hi. I think this is going to be a lightning rod for the chief. I mean, she's already gone on the record as saying that, there's much about what's being proposed that she doesn't like. I don't know if you have a general comment about that or not.
Sarah, if you don't, I do.
Go for it, Nancy.
We have to gain the trust of the people and I guess the trust of the police department in some capacities. But the legislature gave localities this kind of authority for a reason. And sure, I know that she wouldn't like it, but we're laying the groundwork for a reimagination of public safety in a way. This is kind of like a very infantile step towards that conversation. And I think I would take what she says in consideration, but my greater consideration is what is best for the public, what is best for the community. And hopefully there could be, some compromise. And if not, well, there isn't.
No, I agree, Nancy. That wasn't, I wasn't saying that's a deal breaker. I was just saying that we need to anticipate that as we move through the process. And I just wondered if Sarah or Teresa had any thoughts as they've worked this out, in anticipation of that being a potential stumbling block.
Well,
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead,
Go
Ms.
ahead.
Burke.
I was just going to say, I think there are parts of this that, I think the thing that about this model that is the most sort of controversial would be that there is no internal affairs investigation of complaints. So they don't get a significant number of complaints at this time. And any board, any oversight body that has significant value, and there have been studies of the efficacy of these types of bodies. The ones that have investigative power are the ones who actually prove to have decreased racial disparities, decreased arrests, where Black people are arrested more than white people. There are in violence, police violence, specifically shootings and killings. They are reduced in areas where police are not investigating their own conduct. So I think there is a lot of movement in this direction, and there are a lot of models that are similar in that the investigative authority lies with the oversight body. Those are usually staffed, but in our small city, it could, I think, possibly be on a retained basis. And I think a lot about the sort of funding question that people often say, like, where are you going to get the money for all of this? And I know that the internal affairs budget is not clearly defined, at least in the most recent budget that I saw. But it's at least within a multi-million-dollar category that the police budget has outlined. And I could see if they don't have to do as much investigative work on internal complaints, on internal affairs, not criminal investigations, but on these internal investigations, if they don't have to do those as much, I could see taking that money from that department and placing it in the hands of the CRB and the executive director. And I think in some ways there's there's a little bit more process here for law enforcement officers, which is interesting. The way that it works now, there is they have a whole general order about how their internal affairs department works, and there is not a full hearing like there would be for the CRB. So for the CRB in this section that Teresa went through in orange, there's a hearing where the officer, you know, if the chief mandates cooperation with the investigative arm of the CRB, then they will participate in those. You know, I won't get into Garrity and the whole analysis that we thought about with that, but there's a way to pretty easily do that. Get the investigator to be able to be involved in that hearing and present, you know, be represented, present evidence, present witnesses on their behalf too. And so there's, I think, a way that there's a way that this kind of gives a little bit more transparency and process to everybody involved, including law enforcement officers.
Thank you.
So what about internally initiated administrative investigations? And B, what about the case in which an investigator comes across evidence of criminal misconduct?
So Bill, just to be clear, this is Teresa, are you, for the first one, are you talking about incidents that aren't raised by a complaint?
Yes.
So I had foreseen it acting pretty much the same way, where there is some event that is brought to the PCRB's attention, and then the PCRB notifies the executive director, who then just does the same process, where they ask the police department for all of the basically the whole file regarding that incident, and then it's a similar process. In terms of the public hearing, I mean, I just want to be clear with this flow chart, and what's great about the fact that it's a flow chart is you can move these boxes around, you can take pieces out, you can modify what's in there pretty easily. So maybe there are pieces of this that don't fit perfectly in different models, but you can certainly reimagine the hearing piece to fit with the non-complaint incidents. And then can you remind me what your second question was?
Yeah, criminal activity.
So yeah, and that's another thing that you can see that wasn't directly thought of by either me or Sarah, because it's not on here, but I know that your draft ordinance had a stay of proceedings. Like I just said, something can be added to this process, to this chart, to account for that. Like I said at the beginning, this isn't what we think necessarily should be adopted. It's just trying to start tackling the way forward and dealing with some of City Council's questions and trying to really think deeply about, okay, this is how this can work, and this is kind of a starting point. But I think those are important questions that you raised. And what I guess I'm trying to get at is this isn't the end of the road. There are certainly things that can be added or taken away from this. It's just a pure model and our first attempt at laying it all out on the roadmap for you guys.
And Bill, I just wanted to mention that in the CPD's policies as they stand now, there's a section that says complaints alleging criminal conduct shall be immediately brought to the attention of the chief of police, who shall designate appropriate personnel to investigate the complaint, and if deemed necessary, may ask another agency to undertake the investigation. Which sort of brings me to 2 points. The first is that
Yeah.
I think you know where I'm going with my second point, but the first is that it's already contemplated in the police department's procedures that if there is an allegation of criminal conduct, then the chief of police should know about that immediately. I don't think that should change in this model. I think that if there's criminal conduct, the chief of police should be notified immediately of that and should designate whomever in her department she believes should investigate that criminal conduct. The issue of whether there has to be a stay of your investigation, I'm not sure is quite as clear, and I think it's something that you all should spend a significant amount of time discussing. And I will note that in a lot of areas that this says that the chief of police may ask another agency to undertake the investigation. And I think in practice that usually operates as the Virginia State Police. But it's not outside of the realm of CPD's awareness to designate investigations to outside professionalized parties who know how to conduct investigations.
Mr. Watson, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I want to thank Ms. Hepler and Ms. Burke for working hard and helping us out with all of this. I know I tend to like flow charts, but I know they can confuse a lot of people sometimes, and usually the people that made them, can look at them and figure out the flow. One of the questions I was wondering with this flow chart and this model, does this assume that internal affairs has completely gone away, or is it just assuming that on a particular case, we've chosen to do all the investigation ourselves?
So this is just assuming that internal affairs is no longer engaged in investigating complaints on police officers from the community. And you'll see that we have another one where another flow chart, the second one, where that's not the case. But this one is just the PCRB investigates the complaints, and the internal affairs department does not do that. They might be involved in other areas of officer misconduct that don't involve the community, but community complaints, it would be the PCRB. And that's what we contemplated, because that is the most powerful model. I think that's the most powerful way of interpreting and engaging in the investigative power. And I would just say for the next one, I know we're going to talk about what we envision for pros and cons for this model, but the second one that involves the internal affairs department, that one is another, I guess, it's another version of a powerful investigative model, but it just involves the internal affairs department. And we'll go into later why Sarah and I think that this model is preferable, the one in front of you, but this one does not include them.
I've got one additional question. Maybe I should wait, but I'll throw it out there now. I remember in that meeting with City Council, one of the questions that Lloyd Snook asked was, actually might have been the chief, was if we have a case where we need, you hear my kids upstairs, if we need forensics assistance, right? And we're a volunteer board, and Sarah mentioned money a minute ago. How do we provide professional level forensics? Do we leverage the existing? Do we find ourselves at points where we're making an MOU with the existing internal affairs and still kind of leveraging that? Because we're only getting 30 complaints a year at this point. So at a city this size, unlike DC where they may get 30 in a week or even a day, I think those are the things that we're gonna hear, right? Like, how do you all do this? And so I'm just asking you that.
I think it's important to keep in mind that some questions are for such a small subset of circumstances that it might not be worth a considerable amount of energy finding an answer to that particular question. So most cases that involve the need for forensics are criminal investigations, which you will have nothing to do with. So that's great. If the example that the chief gave at the meeting was if somebody is alleged to be drunk on the job, and what they do is they have a relationship with I'm guessing the Department of Forensic Science in Richmond. They can send off a request for urinalysis or whatever it is, and receive the results back. I think you could establish an MOU where you have a relationship where the police department performs those types of tasks if that's necessary for the investigation that you're doing. I think you could consider whether as a public, you know, you're basically you're similar to the police department in that you are going to be operating under the city manager umbrella, your ED will. And I think it's worth considering if your ED could have a relationship with, where they could request forensics of DFS in Richmond, or there's private labs that you could send, you know, I mean, doing maybe your analysis every 5 years isn't going to break Charlottesville's bank. So I don't think you need to worry about that too much. I think that question was asked when there was a little bit more confusion as to where the differentiation between your investigative role and criminal investigative role is. And I think it needs to be made really clear that the CRB is not initiating criminal investigations.
So are there any more questions before we go on? Just want to make sure.
I don't know. I mean, I think with obviously the stated challenges, both with the chief and members of council, I don't know that the appetite is there for this type of model. And, you know, even before we get to the chief, we've got to get 3 votes to be able to move anything forward. And that, I mean, just based on the last meeting, the work session, and, you know, conversation with legal counsel earlier, I don't know, it seems like a tough hurdle to get over. And I don't know if you guys have any, you know, comments toward that end.
I mean, I don't think you all have really tried to work it out. And this is part of the reason for being here tonight. Is what was asked at that meeting was, show us how this works in practice. Show us what this actually looks like. And I think that, you know, part of why we're, you know, I mean, all of us are volunteers here at the moment. We just don't get your clout and your titles. But, you know, why everybody here is volunteering time is because the idea is to actually make something that's valuable and that meets the community's needs. And I think that when we get too focused on who the decision makers are and what they're going to be fearful of in terms of change, we really lose the perspective of, like, what are the problems that people would like to have addressed by a CRB. And I think that if that's not at the forefront of every conversation you're having with city council, then you're missing the boat. And you know, one of the main things that we heard with public engagement work over the past, you know, 3 years, it started out with, you know, investigations don't ever happen on time. Sometimes they never happen at all. And that has thankfully improved dramatically. Some folks said, nobody wants to file a complaint. Why would you file a complaint with the exact same people who are going to investigate that you're alleging have wronged you? Why would you send your complaint to that department and assume that anything different is going to happen than the same mistreatment that you feel like you've experienced? And so this is an opportunity to say, and some folks said the complaints were never investigated, or, you know, they never got the process that they were supposed to get through filing a complaint. And so by thinking of, like, what is this need that we're hearing about removing, you know, I mean, you all know that within the Derek Chauvin case, he had, you know, however many complaints filed against him, and their CRB had no authority to do anything. And so just filing complaints and like operating as usual doesn't seem to be working very well. So I think it's worth considering, how do you try to show folks that you're serious about this? You have a plan. There are ideas out there, and it's not, you know, maybe they don't buy this one, maybe they like another one better, but, like, unless you get into the weeds and the process of it and really dig into what it looks like, I don't think you can argue for the points that you need to be arguing for. And I just don't think it's time to say, well, let's roll over and we can't do any of this.
Well, I'm not saying that.
I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
that's the you know, that's what we heard the first go round. They wanted to hear more. They wanted to hear a little bit more of what the process looks like in action. And the reality is, there's like 20 different ways this could go. You know, you could build models that all look very different, and the city needs to become engaged in that process and be helpful in terms of, it sounds like you had a great conversation today in terms of understanding what might work in terms of discipline, how the grievance proceedings work. Like that's what you all need to really be given access to by the city, because until recently, there, you know, it's all kind of been a big black box, which is really hard to build procedure around.
Mr. Chair, I just had a wonder if the council president, Ms. Hudson and Ms. Robertson, and maybe we don't want to open this can of worms, but, you know, do they see any Garrity problems with this model? Because I know that's going to be a lightning rod as well.
Lisa, with respect to Garrity and the model that's proposed here, largely because the PCRB doesn't contemplate and couldn't contemplate having investigative authority for criminal matters, you don't have the same Garrity implications. Okay. Garrity is all about avoiding the possibility of self-incrimination,
right,
and use of investigative information against you in a criminal proceeding that was essentially coerced from you by virtue of your status as an employee. Right, so right. It's not directly implicated by this process.
Great, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Cynthia, this is Lisa. How would your answer change in the event that during, I mean, there's always the possibility, at least theoretically, that some sort of criminal activity could be discovered during the investigation.
Well, that's the circumstance in which the ordinance or procedures that are adopted to implement the ordinance address matters of deferral to criminal investigative authorities, whether it's the chief of police in addition to the Commonwealth's attorney, or at least the first stop being the chief of police. And then that way, if everything freezes at that point so appropriate decisions can be made, then you minimize the prospect for there to be any violation of rights that come into play when criminal liability is in the offing.
And then would you say,
but let me say too, well, go ahead, Lisa, we'll finish your question.
So my second, and these are just sort of questions I'm throwing out there. I'm not disagreeing with your initial answer, but you know, if the board were to require testimony or were to issue a subpoena to a police officer, as a practical matter, would you agree that whether or not a Garrity warning was given, if later there was some criminal investigation related to that same activity, those compelled statements couldn't be used?
There certainly would be a challenge along those lines, and then it would be a determination for another body to make. Yes.
Right. Thanks.
We found one a case that I was just trying to find, but that Garrity rights can still apply in a situation where an employee is being investigated by an outside agency, as long as the employer, so the chief of police, makes clear that the employee is required to cooperate with the outside investigator, but that cooperation can't be used against them in a criminal proceeding. And I think that's fairly well established law.
Absolutely well established law. The matter of putting up a firewall between criminal investigation work and what on this side of the fence is administrative.
Great, thank you for that clarification. It's reassuring.
I also want to thank Sarah for pointing out that, you know, we need to do a lot more work with the city council about the model that we choose, and that we have 3 people on council who ran as a unified platform for a strong oversight board, and we have a primary coming up June 8th. Don't know who suss out of that. But hopefully those folks will be a little bit more verbalizing their thoughts on our PCRB. So far, I'm not really sure where a majority of those folks stand. I know they had a brief forum, but I think, Sarah, you're right that it's not time to roll over and accept less because it's easier.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that that was what you all were going to try to do. I was just saying the idea that there's no appetite for it right now after one meeting makes a lot of sense to me. That people are a little bit, it's different for our city, and it takes a lot of walking through and contemplating what it actually looks like procedurally, and it takes a lot of sort of reassurance that you all are thinking through things correctly, and that you're really like trying to meet real community needs with a model that does that and isn't trying to do anything else or sneaky or extra outside of that. So I think there's a lot of room to explain this and to do this in a way that makes this actually a pretty appetizing, if we're going to keep going on with that analogy, model.
And one thing I'll just add is that part of the purpose of mapping this out is to identify areas where there still might be some confusion, areas that might raise questions for y'all, and what needs to be addressed, what needs to be looked into more deeply, so that if you guys want to have, and the community certainly does, a powerful oversight model where you're investigating complaints, you're on the ground with the community, seeing what the police officers are doing. If you want that, then you can identify what obstacles are going to be in place and how you are going to tear down those obstacles so that you can get to the powerful oversight model that it sounds like you all are advocating for. So City Council has already thrown some questions into the mix. This is our attempt to try to look into that, but obviously you're going to have to look into it even more. And that was part of the purpose of this, is to show you all what else needs to be done, what else needs to be looked into, so that you can get from A to B, with B being a powerful oversight model.
Ms. Huppler, is there a suggested time frame that maybe you and Ms. Burke have come up with
A time frame
for implementation?
So Sarah, you can correct me, I don't think we have an idea of a timeline necessarily. I think that there are certain, I don't know if you're going to have like a finished procedural product. I think that you're going to be working kinks out as you go along. Obviously, when you start implementing the model that you want to implement. Sarah, do you want to speak to that at all?
No, I'm trying to open the windows in my house. It's really hot in here, so I don't have anything to say. I can still hear you, but I'm like leaning over the computer, which is why I turned my video off.
So I guess the answer then is we didn't contemplate a timeline. And that's probably another question that needs to be worked out.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, so Ms. Parks, can you go to the next slide? All right, so rather than read all of these to you, and I assume you've already seen them, I just wanted to highlight a few things. So especially now that we're having this piece of the conversation about why and a model without the Internal Affairs Department being involved is so important. So the biggest thing is that the police are not investigating themselves in any circumstances dealing with community incidents. That's absolutely key. In the next model, which involves internal affairs investigating complaints, there's a few situations where those investigations are going to have an impact on the process. In this model, the police investigations and the police investigating themselves aren't going to have an impact on the process, at least not any that we had contemplated. It creates transparency on what the police are doing. And a big piece of it is, and I know this is a foremost concern on the PCRB's mind, is where is the money going to come from? I know Sarah already touched on this, but if the Internal Affairs Department is not spending the money looking into these community-based complaints, that money can go to you can develop the infrastructure that you need to do intake, do investigations, and have the hearings. That's why the what I listed as cons, I don't see those as negatives. You need infrastructure. You need some type of complaint intake system if you're going to have a long-term investigative model. So those are the pros in a nutshell. It's incredibly important I think it's really important for y'all to have investigative power, because as I already said, it puts you on the ground. You can see all the complaints. You're not going to have potentially biased input from the police department. And it allows you to really cater to the needs of the community and hear what the community is saying. So I wasn't sure.
I thought Teresa's point that she made on this pros list of like gaining, well, most of these are Teresa's points. The one that I thought was really great was like what you gain from the information that when you're investigating, like you gain a lot of information about how the police department works, what should be happening, what is not happening that you believe should be happening. And it can inform both your sort of policy analysis, which is going to be part of your role, and it also can inform your auditing function and can be really well interwoven with hopefully the auditor that you will get, so you will be able to be like addressing an individual's concerns and investigating those concerns in an unbiased and unassociated with the police in that manner. And then you'll also be able to have a really like a great sense of what's actually going on both in the police department and in the community. So I think it is kind of strangely like a tool for more systemic analysis and change too.
And just to add to that, just as an example, like when I was a public defender, I saw a lot of, and I heard a lot of community members talking about what they had experienced from the police. And when I was looking at certain police policies, like their tow policy or their search policy, I had those stories and those incidents in the back of my mind, helping inform me as to what to target with police procedure and policy for constitutional attacks. So I would just reiterate what Sarah said. It's really important to have that knowledge if you're looking at through the auditing function, the police practices and procedures. Otherwise, you're kind of looking at them in a vacuum. But if you have all of this information about what the police are doing on the ground level, it'll help inform your auditing power.
So are you, I guess, would I characterize it correctly that you're saying the investigatory power outweighs the auditing power if you had to be in an either or situation?
No. So what I'm saying is, I think you should definitely have both. And that the investigatory power is a foundation for the auditing power. It helps inform what you're looking at, which policies you need to pinpoint, what about the policies is the problem. They'll help you navigate the auditing process.
Okay.
But I think you need both.
Like, here's an example. Like, what do y'all want to audit right now?
The budget.
Great. What else? You probably don't have a great sense of what policies and practices and actual policing practices you want to audit without having a really deep sense of both what the community alleges is going wrong and what you actually see when you're investigating an individual case. Because by investigating individual cases, you can build a systemic awareness that is really hard to do without that level of insight.
I just wanted to add that the I really want us to push for this piece about police not investigating themselves, because I think that goes to our credibility in the larger community. I think anytime there's a perspective or perception rather that the police are investigating themselves. It's just not looking like we're doing our job, or nor are we doing incredibly. So I think that's one we're going to get pushback on, but I think it's one that we ought to fight for.
And I think it really meets a specific need. Like, it's thinking about this instead of like, what tools do we have? Wyatt Rolla has described this legislation as like a Swiss Army knife. Like, you have so many different tools, it's hard to know which ones to use. But if instead of thinking like, what can I hit with this Swiss Army knife, you think, what needs to be addressed? Like, what issues could be addressed through a powerful civilian oversight body? And then what do we use? Are we using the, I don't know, the screwdriver? Are we using the little scissors that come on the Swiss Army knife? Like, instead of thinking about the powers so much, think about like, what are you trying to do? What problems are you trying to address? And what would you like to see change? And how could you actually re-envision how people feel about whether there will be heard if they allege wrongdoing, and whether anything will ever be done about it, and whether it can actually keep people from being in harm's way. Because I think that should be the goal. Like, it's not just about coming up with something cute. So should we move on to the second one? We'll probably go through it.
Ms. Carpenter, did you want to say something? Because I saw you.
No, I was just, you were talking about like things to look at, and I'm very much interested in, traffic stops, and when the data comes out of that, and what does it show about what happens to people, who are pulled over? What other things happen to them? But I don't know if that's part of that's.
No, I think it's a really great question. I think a lot of people are looking at right now, and one way for you all to have the fluency in the issues and the to know what to look for is to have really gotten boots on the ground in terms of investigating and understanding when somebody alleges a traffic stop that has violated their rights or violated the policies of the police department. Then you all will learn a lot about it. And I don't mean to say that people's experiences should be like your training ground by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think any of this shouldn't be happening to anybody, but I do think it's a very important way for you all to have access to something that right now you don't even really know how it operates. It's very hard to understand, and it's intentionally built this way across the entire country. This isn't a Charlottesville thing, that we don't know what happens in police when police investigate themselves. All we know is that it often doesn't result in the results that folks are hoping for.
Okay, so Ms. Parks, can you hit the next one? All right, so this is the one with the parallel internal affairs investigation. The major highlights of this, I know it looks more complicated, but I actually only added the 3 lighter colored boxes kind of in the middle. So it's just that the internal affairs also does an investigation. They issue a report. That report could come into play during the hearings appeal to the full board. It could come into play during the disciplinary determinations, and probably during the grievance procedure. So it's this, like I said earlier, there's these 2 models that still ensure that the PCRB has a pretty strong investigative power. However, there are more instances for the police to kind of interfere with what happens with the officer and take some of the power away from the community. So those are the highlights of that. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that piece or have any questions before we move on to the pros and cons. All right, can you hit the next slide, please? All right, so the major one, or actually there's several cons. So the pros are the same as the first, but they come with a whole bunch of with negatives. Witnesses are going to get interviewed. Again, we already just talked about the police are investigating themselves. It's going to be more expensive because the city has to pay for 2 investigative models. There'll be 2 different sets of records, and just so on and so on. And I think the biggest one to highlight, which I pretty much just said, was that there would be definitely less community trust in the process, especially if people are being interviewed, more than once, and the police are able to use their reports to kind of infiltrate the PCRB process. So that's that. If you can go to the next one, Ms. Parks. So that's it. I just wanted to put a little like shameless plug out there that the flowchart was made using free software called Lucidchart. So if you wanted to have this, the file or the thing that the flowchart that I made, you can use this software to kind of play around with it as you wanted to. But really what I wanted to focus on are what are the next steps? What do you board members have to do now to get the strong investigative power and disciplinary power that you want?
Well, I just want to say what a great job that Teresa and Sarah have done with this, and Bill as well has been involved. But this is so helpful. I mean, I'm a very visual person, so it really helps me get it and sort of see a process. So it's just a terrific thing you've done to help us with this. So thank you.
Well, I also just
Yeah.
want to say, like, maybe we're just the most efficient human beings on the planet, but this was like a couple of days. And Teresa has been just sort of thrown into the Charlottesville CRB work in her last 5 weeks at Legal Aid. But, I think I don't want to discredit the extraordinary amount of work that she's put into it, but she's been on the ground here for 5 weeks and has like a very great sense of a lot of these issues due to a significant amount of research and sort of considering different models and researching other models across the country. And it feels so overwhelming. And I know that it feels that way because I was in this position that you all were in a few years ago. And it is overwhelming, but it's like, I think that my biggest sort of next steps recommendation is like, figure out who does what on this board, make to-do lists for yourselves, do the research and the sort of thinking, and then get back together and constantly sort of re-churn through your ideas. Because the reason we just sort of threw this together and put it out there was not because it's a final product, but because you have to throw something out there for people to start talking about, and then to tell you whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Like, people might say this is a terrible idea. That's fine. Come up with something else. And so I think like I would love to see this board come up with concrete next steps that everybody, commits to what their particular to-do items are, and then come back. And I mean, I'm happy to take on some research projects that you all specifically need. And I'm not going to volunteer Teresa, but I'll wink over there. So I think like, take advantage of the fact that there are folks who are willing to help, and but also like you all have to really get into the weeds in this stuff. I know Bill has done that, but I think it takes the full board doing that, and it takes a lot of bringing it back to the public meetings, having frequent public meetings, so that people can provide input and tell you whether what you're doing is going to work or not. Because this idea might not work. That'd be fine. We'll come up with something else. Like, there's no pride involved in this. It's all just trying to find the best solution for very complex problems.
Okay, I gotta act as devil's advocate here for just a second. When I sent around a investigatory options table, which Teresa and Sarah and all the members of the board saw. And there were, 3 options on it. Board investigates everything, board investigates few things, and board doesn't investigate any complaints was option number 3, which we haven't discussed. It's not a bad interim solution. It's cheap. And I have to point out that in such a system, we would be counting on a very, very, very empowered auditor to be joined at the hip with the director of the Internal Affairs Department to follow on a day-to-day basis every investigation, to get every investigatory report, to see all the camera, the body cam footage, so that he or she would immediately be able to identify problems and issues to bring to the attention of the board. It's not the same as investigating everything yourself, but for the time being, as a start, it might be something we could consider.
So, I mean, I'll say this isn't a start. You're like 3 years into this process and almost nothing can be done by the CRB at this point. So I don't think we're at the start. I think the fact that this is a slow moving train has been made very clear. And I don't think that starting with this new state law and asking for something that is just like slightly more than what you have now is ever going to get you to where you want to be. So I think if you don't ask for where you actually want to be, then you're not going to get it. You're not going to get there. And it's just not, I don't know. I mean, Michael Payne's on here, but, and a lot of folks who've lived here for a really long time, but like, I don't see a lot of, I've lived here for 34 years. I don't see a lot of things that like work in a highly iterative process here in Charlottesville, where you start with something that has very little power and then sort of slowly becomes a really powerful and functional body. So I just don't know why you'd come to the table with that particular request. If what it really kind of does in my mind is it takes that auditor is also not accountable to the public in the same way that a public facing board is. And so you're just creating another staffed position without considering accountability between the staff and the board so much, and transparency issues where, yes, they're external to the police department. You still have the police investigating themselves. You could just find somebody who basically kind of rubber stamps all police activity, which is usually, it's hard to find those folks. It's hard to not find those folks applying for that job.
Yeah, but I just, one of the reasons why I brought that up was that in one of our NACOL trainings, they pointed out that, I think it was Seattle, has a sort of a hybrid internal affairs group that's led by a civilian, basically. But it's the same, otherwise it's the same old people. And so far that seems to work pretty well. So,
yeah, I mean, I just always caution us for saying what works well, because I mean, sometimes you can look at things and they seem like they work well, and what is actually happening is nothing's happening. And so like the boards that a lot of folks say like work well, they don't do much. And that what works well is that it doesn't cause any ripples. Nobody's like, they're not holding a lot of hearings. And like, for example, like Fairfax is one of these boards that the city keeps talking about it like it's this gold standard. But if you do what I think is the most important thing to do, which is go talk to people in Fairfax as to whether this is actually working for like Black communities, houseless communities, people who are most experiencing the brunt of policing, they either don't know it exists, or they don't think it's helpful, or they think it has no teeth and is just sort of a, just something that gets some people some political clout, and that's it. So I'm not saying that about Seattle. I don't really know, Bill. I mean, you've done a lot of research on this stuff, but like, I think sometimes what looks like it might work is actually something that is really has no power. It doesn't mean that the things with power don't work. I'm just saying sometimes that's the case.
And I mean, I just want to, NACO also says that each, whatever review board is different from each locality. And I think if I remember that example correctly, that the internal affairs group reported to that particular person. Speaking from, aside from being on the board, but as a Black man in this community, if I were to go out and have a negative interaction with the police, I'm not interested in an auditor doing whatever he or she is going to do. I want an investigation to be done and for that to be made public. That's, aside from everything else that, and I'm not trying to get on a tangent, but aside from everything else on this board, regardless, That's the way I look at it. And I have community members that have grown up with Black men in this space. We're not looking for auditors. We're not looking for trend analysis. We're not looking for any of these paper things. We want to make sure that in the event that we have an issue, a negative encounter with policing that violates our constitutional liberties, that is investigated fully. At the end of the day, whether I'm on this board or I'm off this board, that's what Black men, Black folk across this community are looking for. And that's my hope to help achieve. And it's not knocking you, Mr. Mendez at all, but I still, 2017 is when I had my incident, and it's still fresh in my mind. An auditor is not going to save me in that particular situation.
I want to chime in. I agree with what Chairman Brown says about, strong investigative powers, but I think, an auditor is necessary because if we can do all the investigation we can do and really do a very good, thorough job and, have outcomes, wherever they land. But I also think if you want to, my question, if you want to break up a system that's been almost laser focused on certain folks in this world, that an auditor can help with those analyses to kind of look at what this system is and how it relates to the policy, and if the policy can be mitigated in a significant way to change change the possibility of having those kinds of adverse interactions.
I agree with the chairman, though, Nancy, that the people on the street don't care about that. It's so abstract and it's so removed from day-to-day experience of people that are living with this every day, that if we don't establish a credible, strong presence with this board, then we have no credibility. I hear all the time when I talk to people in the Black community, Charlottesville talks the talk, they don't walk the walk. They've been talking about this stuff for decades, and it's right where it was 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago last week. And I feel so strongly about that. I just cannot say it enough. They are our constituency. We are here to be a voice and a force for good for people that have been badly treated forever.
Well, I agree with you, Jeff, but I also go back to, the People's Coalition who, over the last few years have been so wonderfully advocating for this. An auditor was something that they asked for as well as investigative powers. So I also hear that conversation too from the People's Coalition, which is, made up of a lot of folks,
right,
from those communities. I don't know,
that,
I don't know.
Having an auditor and investigatory powers not being discounted.
Right.
I believe it was initiated or stated earlier that in order to get to the audit piece or to make the audit piece valuable, you have to have the actual investigations there. And I think that what was proposed was looking at solely an auditor, not being in the investigation piece. And, as Ms. Burke brought up, that could be someone that's out of the public eye, having, rubber stamps, whatever, and it's done under the cover of darkness. I'm not interested as a Black man in this community of having that done. These are fundamental rights that every American should be entitled to and should have, and the government should not be in the position of violating those. And when they are, then there should be a redress for that. An auditor, solely having an auditor, that doesn't do that for me.
I didn't say solely. I think we need, both. I'm not advocating one over the other. I'm just saying both have a place. at least, but willing to hear both sides.
I mean, I remember the folks at NACOL saying that there were contracted auditors who did sort of an auditing piece as needed. And I don't know that I'm not necessarily a proponent of that. I think you want a strong investigative model and you want an auditor. If you can get both, I don't see why you wouldn't ask for both and demand both from the outcome or from the outset. But I mean, there are ways similar to sort of the contract investigator that you could, I think, if folks are really concerned about sort of too much power, too many roles or too much money or something, have an auditor on, who is on retainer for some much smaller than salaried benefit position to be able to conduct the audits necessary as the issues come up. I mean, that person's not in the community. There's a lot of issues with that model of doing it, but I think if you're going to do a sort of iterative process where you sort of start slower, like you don't want to do that with complaints. I don't think. I think you want to go in with asking for everything that you want in the investigatory function. And if you need to say, here, let's have a trial period with a contracted auditor who works at a very part-time basis for 2 years, and then see if that's a valuable function. But I don't think that's sort of a staff position that's an outsider. I think you want to give your board and your structure the most investigative power that you can get to address the exact things you're talking about, Bellamy. So what do y'all think, like before we leave, like what needs to be done? Like what research questions are still out there? What do you think, or Michael's on here, like what issues are still at the forefront that folks are concerned about that need more research and reassurance that this is not as terrifying a prospect?
Well, if I can, this is not exhaustive. 2 issues, one of which I've already raised with you, which is sort of cost and organizational implementation issues. How do we go about getting from point A to point B, as we say? The other issue that has come up, which is still of some concern to our legal advisors, is how to fit in whatever disciplinary issues we have, whatever disciplinary policies we adopt, with the existing state law and particularly with laws governing the grievance procedures. So those are the 2 things that pop into my mind. Maybe there are others. I mean,
yeah, that last question, I'm curious. I don't know if either of the legal counsel on the call has do you all think that that's something? Does the municipal grievance procedure get in the way of things if the board is sort of couching where the recommendation should go within the disciplinary matrix that the chief of police already utilizes, and then it gives her the final authority to make her disciplinary decisions? Like, does that
model that you propose fits within the grievance procedure?
Yeah.
Bill and Lisa and I have only had passing conversations about this, not in any detail. And that's just an issue that came up in the course of those brief conversations. It was also posed in the context of a proposal that was not the same description that you gave with your representative model but clearly they can be harmonized in a way that the grievance procedure requirements can be recognized and honored as state law requires. We would, just like everything else that you're considering, all of these matters require further consideration by this body as they decide how they wish to proceed, and how the existing state law framework within which any process has to work will fit in depends on the choices that are to be made, and those choices haven't yet been made. They may certainly peacefully coexist.
I mean, the issue, Bill, that you asked about, like cost and organizational issues, I mean, I think that cost is like a tough one for somebody from the outside to decide. And I think this is where you need to get some buy-in from the city and figure out, you know, what are they interested in? What are they committed to? Because I mean, when we were on the initial CRB, we did a pretty extensive like nationwide cost analysis of these boards, and it was really helpful. Like we got a lot more funding than I think we probably would have if we hadn't done that. But I think that like until you can get a sense of you know, how much the city is willing to sort of engage in the process and work with you on that question, it's just really hard to answer like how much things cost. I mean, the thing is, it's costing money now. Like it's costing us some amount of money that we don't quite know to investigate these complaints at the moment, right? So I would think a great place to start would be to utilize the connections you have in the relationship and figure out how much does this cost the city to do it the way we're doing it now.
So like I said, these models were to hopefully inspire some questions. And then if you have questions, I think what you need to do is, okay, figure out who is going to be responsible on the board for answering that question, give that person a timeline as to when they're going to come back, and that person can at least start looking into that. And it's great that you have you know, independent counsel, and you know, you can try to set a goal for maybe reaching out to her to talk through these issues. If you want to change something on this model, which I assume you probably do, you can work with your fellow members or your independent counsel to figure out what you want it to look like. So I would suggest strongly, just if someone has a question, assigning that question to somebody to answer, and then come back in a week. Okay, what has this been answered? What progress has been made? Because you'll want to be extremely prepared for the next time you meet with city council.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Burke and Ms. Hepler. If there are no more questions from the board.
I would like to hear what maybe some thoughts from Michael Payne, if he's got any at this point.
I mean, I guess similar to some things that have already been raised, you know, around the disciplinary authority piece, and also what the board, depending on whatever model is chosen, not just from a financial standpoint, what kind of resources the board would need, but also resources in terms of staff, the expertise and experiences of those staff. You know, I've got to read through it and think through it a lot more. At least from my perspective, and I imagine it's similar to other counselors' perspective, there's just a lot of questions because there's just a lot we legitimately don't know. We're not doing this. We're not in this work as much as you all are. And we know you're already an all volunteer board anyway, without an executive director. So, you know, outstanding questions, I have, or we have the council have, is not necessarily that we're opposed to anything being proposed, but just legitimate uncertainty, especially because the new state legislation just opened up so many different opportunities for what that model may look like. So I imagine, as was said, what was presented today, there's probably going to be some adjustments and changes to it as we work through it. But again, some of the questions that pop to mind, again, are disciplinary authority and what exactly that looks like is always huge. Again, the kind of specific resources you'll need, and being able to just have conversations with, our city attorney and getting perspectives on not just the powers that are granted, but creating the structures of implementing them, just what exactly that looks like in practice. Are there things that we're not aware of, that we're not seeing with, for example, the board doing all investigations, that problems that might pop up that we could work around and find fixes for? We just don't know what they are. So I don't know if that was really answering your question. It's sort of, I know, not super specific, but some of what came to mind tonight.
I just have a couple suggestions based on that comment before I get kicked off of here, so I'm taking advantage. One is that the police department has their policies for how they do internal affairs investigations. If you haven't looked at them, I think everybody on the call should look at them, because they do contemplate a lot of issues that you might not think about. I mean, they've been doing this for a long time, and despite the fact that a lot of folks don't have trust in that process and that being done fairly, there are procedures in place that make a lot of sense in a lot of ways in terms of making there are certain well, I can't think of it off the top of my head. I remember looking at them earlier today, but look at those procedures, the operating procedures for the way it is occurring now, and it will alert you to the things that they have had to contemplate that can come up that might be some red flags. And if they're not written in there procedurally in the police department, like I think you're probably pretty good. Like they've covered a lot of bases there. So I would be very careful to look at all of those. And then the other thing is the disciplinary question. If it is a full final disciplinary power, that's one thing, but at least, Michael, what we were talking about tonight was still leaving disciplinary authority up to the chief.
Right, and I think that certainly raises fewer questions than the final disciplinary authority approach that had been taken. But again, I imagine as this moves forward, that conversation is just always going to be there and evolving and changing.
Very well. If there are no additional comments, looks like the next item on the agenda is public comment. Ms. Parks, are you able to poll the attendees for any comments?
Yes. At this time, if you'd like to make public comment, go ahead and hit the raise hand icon. Or if you're calling in from a phone, you can press *9. And I'll bring you in the order in which hands are raised. So first up, we have Harold Foley. Hi, Harold. Can you hear us? Looks like you're muted.
Well, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank y'all so much. I appreciate the work y'all doing. I know it's a volunteer board, but I wanted to say this. The state legislators put this together to have the courage to make it happen, right? I think the city council should do the same thing. But I think you all have the ability to push it to the limits, right? I always believe pressure bust pipes or create diamonds. And I think y'all have an opportunity to create a diamond. And so with that said, I hope that what Sarah and Teresa showed you tonight give you the roadmap to really push city council to do better. I've been here all my life, and we always hear that city council want to be this progressive city council, but then they drag their feet for 10 to 15 years, and then people still getting brutalized or still getting assaulted by the police. I don't want that to happen no more, right? I don't want my cousin, my uncle, my aunts, my sisters to be scared when a police officer comes, right? So I'm asking you, the group here, to take the courage to push hard, to apply pressure so we can get those diamonds. Thank you, and y'all have a good night.
Next up, we have Michael Torello. Hi, Michael, can you hear us?
I can, Ms. Parks, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Can.
Okay, wonderful. I wanted to first introduce myself to the board. This is my first meeting that I've attended. My name is Michael Torello. I live at 726 Levy Avenue here in Charlottesville. A little bit of context. I currently am employed in Baltimore City for Ms. Mosby as an assistant state's attorney, and am really struck with that as a background, with the wonderful presentation that the working group put together on April 27th. I think Mr. Mendez presented it. I've been following, obviously, what's been happening here in Virginia in the new legislature, and I think that the legislature has empowered boards to really take on a much more powerful model. And I really thought that the presentation that you guys put together again a couple weeks ago was very well done, and I think highlights a lot of the issues and a lot of the steps that the Civilian Review Board can take to be more powerful, number one, and get that trust from the community, number two, that everybody wants. As for today's presentation, if I have a few seconds, I did want to comment. I thought Ms. Burke and Ms. Hepler did a wonderful job, but I do have some comments specifically as to two things. Number one, the idea of having an auditor, which I know that was presented in the working group as well. I cannot stress enough, as someone who has conducted investigations for the last 10 years, how important an auditor or an analyst or it can be in conducting good investigations. We use them in Baltimore City all the time in our crime strategies unit, and they are absolutely invaluable. Investigations lead auditors to audit certain information, but auditors uncover information that gives rise to investigations. And so it is so incredibly important that you guys push for both the investigative and auditing ability. And finally, because I don't want to take up too much time, I do want to say that one of the models I think that was Ms. Burke was presented first was an idea where the Civilian Review Board would investigate all misconduct and that the police wouldn't investigate any. And that seems to pave the way to eliminate internal affairs. And I think that that would be a huge mistake on a couple different levels. Internal affairs doesn't just investigate, in my experience, police misconduct as a result of community complaints. They investigate all manner of police misconduct, some of which is really important in making sure that the wrong officers don't end up in a position to cause harm in the community. They investigate overtime fraud, failures in the field, accidental discharges where no one gets shot, but weapon misfires, things that expose incompetent officers or distrustful officers. If you do not have an internal investigating division in the police department, you are going to be missing a huge amount of opportunities to either get rid of officers who don't belong on the force or train officers so that they don't end up harming someone in the field. If that safeguard is not there, unfortunately, I feel that you're going to see more community complaints because there are going to be more officers in the wrong position who cause harm to members in the community. And that is going to increase your burden tenfold. And I hope that that is considered when you guys make your final proposals to the city council about how you want to move forward. I strongly recommend you do not attempt to eliminate an internal investigations division in the police department. I think they can be a huge asset to you. And that's all. Thank you for the time.
Up next, we have Walt Heineke.
Hi, members of the board. Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for your time and effort today. I just wanted to remind you that you're going to have to think about who you're working for here. You work for the citizens of Charlottesville, especially those who are disadvantaged and who are subject to police brutality and police harassment. You don't work for the chief of police. You don't work for the city attorney. And to a certain extent, you don't even work for the city council. Your job is to basically work for the people of this city to protect them. And if you can't do that, if you're thinking about, how to be a bureaucrat in this system and how to dismantle and prevent the strongest model from being put into place, I don't know if you should be on the board. So I was really happy to hear Mr. Brown and Mr. Frazier say that their target audience for this are the people of Charlottesville. Let's stay focused on those people rather than coming up with every possible excuse not to do this. Now, the state has given you opened the door for you to create the gold standard model, the gold model. And tonight you heard Teresa and Ms. Burke give you basically the gold standard model for doing this. And rather than dismantling it and questioning it and picking it apart, I hope that you'll embrace the gold standard, because this is the gold standard for both investigation and for oversight and for discipline. And that's what we need here. That's what the city council asked for in 2017. As you probably know, I was on the rotunda the night of August 17th August 11th in Charlottesville, when the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists invaded. I sponsored two protests in the two pocket parks around the main park when the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists invaded Charlottesville. And I'm not afraid of them coming back. What I'm afraid of is that you and the city council aren't going to find the political will to vote for the strongest possible model that the state has enabled and the two ladies that spoke tonight have offered you in terms of a vehicle and an avenue to get there. And Councillor Payne, you're never going to have all the information you need. This is a matter of mostly of political will. We're going to have to try the gold standard and see how it works. We're never going to have all the information. If we're waiting around for all the information, we're never going to get there. So this is the time to find the political will to protect the people in our community from police brutality, and not to just follow blindly and worry. What I worry about is that oftentimes the people in City Hall, some of the conservative city councilors are going to worry you with all the things that can go wrong, rather than thinking about how to make this go right. And I think it's your job to tell city council that this is what needs to be done and let's do it, not to pick it apart and not to bureaucratize it. Okay, so I hope you'll keep in mind, what we're trying to do here. Keep in mind George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, right? This is where we're headed. And this is what we need you to do here. And I'm worried because I hear three of you seeming to speak about all the ways that we can't do this. We need a go-to attitude, and we need you to help us make this work. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Katrina Turner. Hi, Katrina, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, I want to speak tonight because I'm one of the initial members of CRB. And as a Black woman on that board, I literally went through hell. Me and the other two Black women on the board were literally called token, because they felt that we didn't do enough for this board, right? I had the Commonwealth attorney come after me, trying to put me in jail for something she did not investigate before she came after me. Me and Miss Parker, one of the other initial members of the CRB, we were accused by the chief of police of running the police away, of all the police quitting, the police department because we stood up for this community. Okay. As far as my complaint, yes, I have a complaint. I had a complaint, over my son and everything that happened, after Miss Charlene Green left. she turned my case over to Todd in Human Rights. Human Rights turned that case over to Lisa Robertson. I haven't heard a word, not one word in what I think it's been over two years. Lisa has not contacted me one time after Human Rights contacted her on my case. So there's a lot of things, internal affairs. When my case went on, there were friends all through the police department. So when we talk about investigating friends, we have to make sure that the people in the police department are not cooperating with each other, to get this officer off. Because I have so much proof on my case, but nobody's seen, even though there were so many rights that were found that against the police department, nobody did anything. So I'm asking that you all at least present something to city council to see what they will and will not accept. Because if you keep on saying they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. The state has given you the power to do this. Present something. What is it going to hurt for you all to write something up and present it to city council so they can go through it, see what they don't approve, and then come back to you all, and then we can know what they don't want and what they do want, and then we can start from there. But if you keep on saying that they're not going to approve this, they're not going to, you have to present it before you say they're not going to do it. So that's all I'm asking, if you just present something to city council and then see what they're not gonna accept. Thank you.
If anyone else would like to make public comment at this time, please go ahead and hit the raise hand icon.
Miss Parks, we've had 4 at this time. I think in the interest of time, we are a bit over, and there are some other items on the agenda. So we do want to, I guess, hold public comment for now so that we can work through the remaining items on the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Next is the status of the complaints. Currently, as of 2021, there have been 10 complaints which complainants have checked to have them sent to the PCRB from, well, in total that we're tracking. I believe 1 actually came to us, sent over to CPD. The rest came from CPD to us, and 6 are closed. There are 4 that are still open. All of those have been timely filed. Are there any questions about that?
Yes, for the people in our either watching online or on this webinar, can you give just a brief description? Are these complaints emanating from traffic stops or pedestrian stop and frisk, incidents on the downtown mall? Just to kind of give, when people hear, they can go look at a website, but we're here now. We've got at least 15, 20 people listening to us. I think it would be nice going forward to kind of just have a snapshot of where people are at when they have these interactions or when they see these interactions between the police and the community. I think it'll make it more personal.
Sure, that data can be provided. It's not available now, but I will get that to the full board and we can present that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up is update on the executive director process. And before we have that, I am disqualifying myself from participation in any board discussions or actions relating to the city's recruitment of the executive director. Because I have applied to be employed in that position, I've filed a written disclosure statement with Clerk of Council, and that statement is available to the public upon request from Ms. Robinson or Ms. Thomas. At this time, I turn over the gavel to the Vice Chair until the board's discussion of the recruitment process is finished, and I ask that the minutes of the meeting reflect my verbal disclosure. Mr. Mendez.
Thank you, Bellamy. Mr. Boyles has proposed an approach to board participation in the interview of executive director candidates. Mr. Boyles, I don't know if you just want to take a minute to explain your proposal.
Be glad to. Thank you. I will start out with, before the proposal, it's been a really strong turnout of applicants. I can't remember whether it was 63 or 64 applications that were received, but quite a number, very strong. And what we're looking to do is to have a panel to interview 4 to 5 of the candidates. The panel would include representative of the city manager's office, police department, citizenry, and 2 of the police civilian review board. What we would do from the panel is then cut that down to 2 or 3 candidates that the deputy city manager and your 2 representatives would then interview for a second time. Of those, then 1 or 2 would be recommended to the city manager, me, and again, in conference with your 2 representatives, hopefully come up with a unanimous decision and present then, just for your review as a board. I know that in your bylaws that it does allow that I could choose someone other than that unanimous decision. Number one, I don't think that's going to happen, but should it happen, I would then have to document that and justify that in some type of a written way. But I think this gives very good representation to the Civilian Review Board to participate through this process, as well as the general public and the city staff. So would be love to have some comments on that if you do have. The other thing I would ask that would help, with 64 applicants, they range all over the board. And I know that you all have looked at the job application and job descriptions. If you do have priorities, I've heard you discussing tonight, the importance of the executive director, having investigation skills as well. But if you have any priority areas that could help us to narrow this down to what you're really looking for, it would really help us a lot, because the skill sets that are provided are very, very wide ranging. Be glad to answer any.
Yeah. I certainly, as far as I can tell, that the proposed procedure, more than meets the requirements for participation by the board members. So I think that's it's very good and generous for Mr. Boyles to have made that offer. At this point, what I would like to do is to accept volunteers for the 2 members on the interview panels. I've received 2 requests to be considered from Nancy Carpenter and Jeffrey Frazier. Is there anyone else who would be interested?
As an interviewee or interviewer, rather?
As an interviewer, yes.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Would Ms. Gilmore be interested? Because I had said that, I was interested, perhaps she was not wanting to, sit on that panel. And I don't mean to put her on the spot, but I really am, wanting to know if she's interested.
Yes, I am.
Okay, then
Can y'all
I
hear me?
will, yes. Then, since Ms. Gilmore has expressed an interest on being on this panel, I think she should be. I'll remove my name from the email that I sent to you, Bill, okay?
Okay, so we have three candidates then. Anybody else? Everybody else wants to stay on or want to remove themselves and make things easier? It's up to you. I suppose then we should probably vote on each candidate.
Wait, did you say there's 3 or 2 board members? 3.
There are 3 board members now who have volunteered.
Okay, yes.
And we need 2.
We were having 2. Now, I would offer it's up to you all, and it would be fine with me if you wanted to rotate such that, because there are 2 or 3 bites at the apple, to be able to get the greatest participation, you could have different members participate in different levels of the interview.
I think that would be very useful.
I kind of am on the opposite fence of that, because having participated in recent interview panels where I work, where we didn't have we were going to have 3 and the third person wasn't there, it really kind of impacted the conversation about people, the persons that were being interviewed. They have a third set of eyes, was really important. So I'd like to see consistency on the interview panel. If there, I think we should only just vote for 2. I think we should vote between Mr. Frazier and Mr. Watson and automatically give Ms. Gilmore one of the interview panel seats, because she actually represents a community where the other 2 are kind of, at large. I think that.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
I think it would be an equitable way of doing that. I think it's important to have, since Ms. Johnson is no longer on our board as another, community representative, I think
if we were, Nancy, if we were going to choose members of presumably disproportionately policed communities, then it would be James. It would be James.
Hey, Jeffrey did say his family owned slaves.
So
black man in America.
Yeah,
out of my car right now.
I think we really have to vote. And again, unless someone wishes to withdraw. I don't want to bully anyone.
Although I'm not opposed to the idea of the rotation, because we could get a variety of folks participating.
I move that we accept Chairman Boyle's offer to have a panel, City Manager Boyle's, to have a panel composed of 3 alternating members, Mr. Fraser, Mr. Watson, and Ms. whose name is not on the board. I'm sorry.
Gilmore,
I'm sorry. Got it. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Gilmore.
Yes.
It's hard for him to say.
Is there a second?
What in the world? Family on the flag.
Okay, Ms. Parks, would you poll the members, please?
So I can poll the members, but I did not hear a second. Okay, Mr. Frazier. Sorry about that. All right, let's see. Mr. Brown?
He's recusing himself.
That's right. Ms. Carpenter?
Okay, so 4 is what we need to vote, because would Ms. Gilmore be able to vote as well?
Everybody can vote.
Okay. No.
You can vote for yourself.
No.
They'll let me
Okay.
vote, right? Yeah.
Mr. Frazier?
Mute buttons on.
Well, y'all pick this one.
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore?
What y'all voting on, rotating?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
So it sounds like the motion carries. Would someone among the three volunteer to consult with the others to give Mr. Boyles some ideas about what the qualities that we are looking for? And I should point out that the whole board should feel free to communicate what we're looking for.
Bill, I just had a question, maybe for the board or for the city manager, about the practicalities of how's this going to work in terms of, you know, I think there's interviews already set up for a week from tomorrow. Is that correct, Ms.? You know, I had that originally from some source, the 21st. Someone had told me to hold that date.
I think we were shooting. We normally try to set these up, but right now we haven't even gotten the short list.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jeff, would you be willing to integrate
Sure.
all the?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you want to send Jeff suggestions for desirable qualities for an
And
executive
yeah, just what
director?
we're looking for, please. Ms. Gilmore, you have my email, or you can, it should be on one of the ones that goes out.
Excuse me?
I was asking if you had my email address just to send your comments.
No, I don't think so.
It should be on any email that you've gotten about board matters. Are they separate on there, Ms. Robinson? Or does it just say PCRB?
Yeah, so there's one PCRB email distribution list, and all of the members are one that and should be getting those emails.
Okay.
But I could share her information with you, vice versa.
Yeah, would you just share my email with everybody if I'm going to be sort of hearing the, you know, bringing the input together?
Mm-hmm.
Just my individual, or they can send it to everybody. I mean, just send it to the group email. Either way, just wanted to make sure everybody had a way to reach me.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that concludes this item of business.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This is we have listed a public comment period, but I don't believe that is necessary after the executive director process. And also we are at 10 minutes over now. We might need a little more time. Do we have a motion to extend the end of the meeting for, I would say, maybe another 15 minutes?
Yeah, I move that we continue till 9 o'clock.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Robinson, would you pull the board?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
No.
I'm sorry, that was, your speech was kind of slurred there. I didn't understand what you said.
No.
No, okay. Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore?
Oh, yeah, because I have something to say, so yeah.
Okay, Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that motion passes. Okay, we are now at the hearing procedures discussion. We have the hearing procedures have been, or the proposed hearing draft hearing procedures have been posted for 30 days on the PCRB website. In addition, we have received comments from both the People's Coalition and another interested member of the public.
Chairman Brown, before you get into that, when could Ms. Gilmore go ahead if she's ready to speak? Before we get into this meaty subject, I'd like to hear what Ms. Gilmore would like to share with us before it gets too much later. I mean, you know, we've done a lot of heavy work early on, and I would like to, you know, give Ms. Gilmore, would like to, you know, hear what she says, and I was hoping that maybe we could hear it before we go into this next item.
I believe that her comments were about the next item, so I'm not sure how she can speak on the next item without hearing the next item. Is that, I mean, Ms. Carpenter?
Oh, I'm sorry, what were you asking me? I thought you were talking to Ms. Gilmore.
Okay, so it's my understanding that Ms. Gilmore was to speak on the next item, but I'm not certain how she can speak on the next item without first hearing the next item.
Okay, I thought it was on some other matter. Okay, very good.
Very well.
No, what are you talking? Wait a minute, hold on. What are you talking about?
Ms. Gilmore, we are going through the hearing procedures discussion. Currently, there have been the hearing procedures have been put out for public comment for 30 days. We have received 2 via email. I was getting into the process of addressing or presenting one of them. Ms. Carpenter suggested that you speak prior to the actual discussion itself. I conveyed to Ms. Carpenter that it did not make sense, having not heard what the actual information is.
You know something? No, actually, I'm sitting here looking. I should have spoke up sooner, but I didn't, Mr. Brown.
Yes, ma'am.
But what's really, and I have to say something, what's really eating away at me is I love the presentation that Sarah and Teresa did. But I'm sitting here looking at this, and I'm sitting here looking at this audit part, and you know, you made a comment about that we have dealings with the police.
I'm
basically,
sorry, Miss Gilmore. I don't mean to. I mean, I kind of have to, but that the presentation portion of the meeting happened earlier. This is a different.
Too much earlier. Hold up. Let me say something. What I want to say is, and I know y'all don't want to hear from me, but what I want to talk about, and I just want to put this out here about the audit, I support that because that's dealing with policy changes, right? Am I right or wrong?
You're right.
And that's what needs to happen. But I'm going to let you go ahead on, and I'll wait till the end. But I support the audit because I'm sitting here reading over this. And I just want to say, y'all stop trying to chop up everything because where I said it's like y'all don't want change. And I've talked to her over and over again, and people work hard on this. And I heard everybody comment, come on, y'all. We want change because we're tired of being dogged by the police department, among other people. But go ahead on. I'll wait till later to finish my comment. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. Going again, there were 2 public comments made with regard to the hearing procedures proposal that had been proposed. One from, let's see, one from an interested member in the public, and then also another from the People's Coalition. I'm not sure if our legal counsel has something that she would like to say at this time on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I simply wanted to ask a clarifying question that might have implications for how much, how deeply you delve into this subject. I know that the hearing procedures have been posted for the time that you indicated. What I'm not clear on, given the more narrow scope of our engagement prior to this, is whether or not those procedures incorporated changes, edits, questions that were raised by the city attorney at the time. If they do not or did not incorporate those changes, I think it certainly is probably prudent for that draft to be informed by the issues and questions that were raised by the city attorney before you take final action on them. Just my suggestion.
Well, no, this isn't final action. This is just an update on it. I was going into, given the public comments, that we were not in a position to finalize the draft without first revisiting what some of those substantive public comments were. And there were a number of them. Some of the concerns in terms of limiting the parties who could, yes, and limiting some of the parties, providing confidentiality for investigative material, eliminating cross-examination, and then the public hearing requirement. Those are matters that will be taken under further consideration. So we are not in a position to vote on those matters at this point without first addressing those in an updated version. Are there any questions or additional comments?
Will you be speaking to what the concerns were raised by the 2 emails that were received and talking about the specific sections or clauses that were problematic?
Well, not at this time. We have referred those to legal counsel to have those matters updated into another draft, which will be put out again for the People's Coalition and additional input. And I believe, and Ms. Robertson can speak on this as well. I think that her comments, in addition to the chief's comments, I think I've been forwarded to you guys. So for that compilation in conjunction with the People's Coalition's comments there.
Yeah, you did forward the most recent draft, and I haven't yet offered any comments on the most recent draft. I did offer very early on some comments on the original draft as you guys were putting it together. But we can certainly do that in conjunction with the Chief of Police as well.
And with the board's permission, Mr. Chair, we'd like to, as you just indicated, incorporate what we can of those comments, and certainly those that were addressed by the city attorney, so that the draft that she next looks at has all of that in one place, and she's looking at it as a holistic product.
Understood. Very well. Are there any additional board comments or questions? Okay, very well. Prior to our last, we have 10 minutes left prior to our last public comment. Ms. Gilmore, if you would like to convey what your concerns were.
My concerns is, can y'all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
My concerns is, a lot of people don't know, when we file a complaint, which in the past I have and others have, nothing has ever happened. We didn't know anything about an audit. We didn't know anything about, I know about policy changes just from the work that I've done, but I agree, and I should have spoke up earlier, but I'm sitting here reading through this. I'm thinking, why would you not want that? Why would you take that out? Because that's how you bring about changes, through policies. And you know, Mr. Brown, that there's a problem with this police department. You know that because you had your interactions. So you know that there's a problem. My concern right now is for my people, all of them that have had interactions. I want something better. Like I said, I've talked to Harold, I've talked to Teresa, Nancy, and different ones about this civilian review board. We need change because without it, we're going to keep on getting the same old thing that we've been getting for years. So I don't know why y'all want to rip this apart. People have worked very hard on this. They have worked hard on it. I don't even see what the problem is, not unless y'all want things to stay the same. We need change. People are suffering in our community. We are suffering at the hands of people that's supposed to protect and serve. So we need change and we want change.
Very well understood. And to clarify, I believe there was an option, there was a discussion of 3 models. The third model was to have solely an auditor, to not have, not be in the investigatory space. And that's what I had mentioned. I had mentioned that as an African-American male in this community, if something were to happen where my rights were violated, an auditor as opposed to investigation under that particular model is not going to help that change of which you're speaking. So, I mean, I'm very, very well familiar with the change as a Black man in this community that we need. And so that was the context of what we were discussing. I believe Ms. Burke and Ms. Hepler earlier had stated that having both investigatory power and an auditor is the operative model as opposed to just having an auditor. And that's
So we do. You think we need both?
yes, ma'am. That's what I stated earlier.
Okay.
Very well.
I think Bill had suggested something that along the lines of if we didn't have everything right now, what he may have been saying, and then I think it got confused. I don't know if my mic is on or not.
No, yeah, we heard.
You're good.
Yeah, I think it has something to do
I
with.
apologize.
I
but
think
my
we all
thing
want
is-
everything. I
That's
think we
why
all
we
want
can't
everything.
get it.
What's that, ma'am?
That's why we can't get it.
Nobody said we can't get it. I never heard anybody say I don't want anything. People been calling in saying we don't want stuff. That's the only reason we're here. Nobody, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't want full power.
Ms. Gilmore, I'm with you.
Oh, City. Say that again.
I'm with you as well, Ms. Gilmore. I don't agree with everything you're saying, and that's why I'm here.
Okay, I guess what maybe I'm thinking too about city council because it looked like they was ripping this thing apart.
I agree with that.
Maybe I'm a little overwhelmed or maybe I'm a little confused, but I know that they have worked on this thing. I think I heard Ms. Turner say 2 years now, and seemed like there's no movement. And when we met with city council, it's like they was just slowly trying to rip this thing apart.
And I understand your sentiment on that, Miss Gilmore, and I mean, you know me personally. I mean, I'm here to fight for our community, and that's something that we are going to do collectively, no matter the differing opinions. But that the characterization that I didn't want an auditor is not correct. We are going to close at 9, and I do want to get to the last public comment section. I think that we have one hand that's left, and probably that's all the time we would have for. So I will ask Miss Parks if she could poll the audience for the public comment remaining.
So right now we have Jeffrey Fogel. Jeffrey, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hi.
Just give me the word.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Okay. First, let me say that I am the interested party for some reason that Mr. Bellamy did not want to mention my name or why I was an interested party. But as you probably know, I am the person who has what should be your first hearing, if you ever have hearings, because it's been pending before you for some 9 months. But what disturbed me tonight was your thinking that the lawyers would answer the questions that were posed either by the People's Coalition or myself. These are issues that are not susceptible to lawyers making those decisions. People say, oh, whatever the lawyer says goes. No, the lawyer can give you advice. The decisions are yours. You need to have a substantive discussion among yourselves about the issues that have been raised by the People's Coalition and myself before you send it to the lawyer. These are your decisions to make. Don't delegate them to a lawyer and to provide, I don't know why, provide you with cover or some kind of naive, innocent notion that the lawyers know better than you. No, you are the people who were selected to enforce this ordinance, and you are the people who have to look at the questions that have been raised, and you have to address them. I'm very disappointed not even hearing a discussion about whether or not it's important, say, for example, to have cross-examination, whether it's important to allow people like myself to file complaints where they observe what they believe is police conduct. These are questions you have to answer. Don't give them to the lawyers, and please discuss them.
The next person we have is Don Gathers. Hi, Don, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. I'm going to ask that you all please bear in mind that there still are very many folks in the city who do not want this board to be successful. There are very many people in positions and seats of power who do not want this board to be successful. So please, let's not continue to kick that proverbial can down the proverbial road. Let's chew into this and actually get it done. Let's not be about silencing anyone. Everyone should hopefully be interested in getting the work done and getting something concrete in place to deal with these issues that have and continue to plague the community and continue to rear their ugly heads. So please, let's do what you were impaneled by council to do and go ahead and get this work completed and get something out that the citizens can indeed feel comfortable with and actually be able to support and let them feel that they have a voice. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any more hands raised at this time.
Very well, thank you, Ms. Parks. So we do have one more NACL training left that we have paid for. That will take place in June. The date has not been set yet, but there will be one more training remaining. Ms. Gilmore, did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. And with that, are there any additional comments? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move. Second.
Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
Yes. Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
No, let's stay here all night. Of course, yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
With that, thank you all and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you all.